Welcome to Bits About Books, the home for conversations with authors of breakthrough books on sales, marketing, and business. I am your host, Shubhanjan Sarkar, founder of Pitchning, the next generation buyer-seller engagement platform, where our mission is to make buying easy. Our guest today is Irene Lefton, author of the insightful book, Who Speaks for the Customer? Improving Results with a Customer-Centric Framework. Irene shares her insights on customer centricity, the evolution of the field, and practical strategies for building better customer relationships. She discusses her journey of writing this book, the importance of metrics, communication, and overcoming friction in business.
Everybody believes they are customer centric, especially companies. They have it on their website. They talk about it. We're a customer centric company. But the reality is that when you're looking at it from the outside in, that when you're looking at it from the customer perspective, most of us as customers don't feel like the companies that we buy from or work with are thinking about us very much.
Irene Lefton is an author, customer success strategist, and longtime advocate for the voice of the customer. Recognized multiple times as a top 100 customer success strategist, she has built and led global professional services, support, and customer success teams across the US, Europe, and Asia, spanning industries, business models, and companies of all sizes. Her career has been driven by a simple belief that centering the customer is not just the right thing to do, it's good business. Today, she speaks, advises, and consults with companies on improving results through outstanding customer experience, including the thoughtful use of AI. She also serves on the boards of 2 nonprofits where she leads initiatives focused on community engagement. She holds a degree in economics and an MBA from the University of New Mexico. Now, on to this customer-focused episode with Irene Lefton. Irene, welcome to Bits About Books. I'm delighted to have you here, and thank you for joining me so early in the morning.
Thank you, Shubhanjan. I'm very grateful to be here.
The first thing, before we go into your background, which is extremely interesting, I just wanted to know why we are still talking about being customer-centric.
It's a great question, and I wonder it myself often. It feels like it should be a very natural thing, especially today when we live in the world of personalization and, technology that we all live in. Technology is, when I started in my career, technology was on the side. Now technology is integrated into life. Yeah. And you would think that customer centricity would follow that naturally, but it doesn't. Everybody believes they are customer centric, especially companies. They have it on their website. They talk about it. We're a customer-centric company. But the reality is that when you're looking at it from the outside in, that when you're looking at it from the customer perspective, most of us as customers don't feel like the companies that we buy from or work with are thinking about us very much. Yes. And that's one of the moments of truth of why I wanted to write the book, actually.
I read that very fascinating account about your father's business, and that's delightful, and that actually shows that I think we talk too much about technology. You really don't need it to be customer centric, and that's one stellar story, and I'll let you tell that story. Okay. Tell us a bit about your work currently. What are you working on? What is keeping you engaged?
Well, I'm semi-retired, so I'm at the end of my career, and I work on things that I choose to work on now. So I do some consulting when I am very interested in the project and the company. I do a lot of advising to startups and small companies and individuals who are finding their way in business, especially people who are interested in customer-facing or customer-centered roles in sales and marketing and customer success in many areas. And I also I keep very busy with a lot of volunteer activity. I sit on a couple boards of directors, and I'm very active in my social life, as you should be when you start to lean into retirement. And I travel, and I have a good life.
Wonderful, wonderful. So when did you decide that it was time to write a book about the customer's voice?
Well, it wasn't a one-time decision to write a book about anything, actually. Through my career, there were many times people said, you should write a book about this, or you should write a book about that. I lived abroad. People said I should write a book about my expat experience. I have many different things that people said I should write a book about, and I always resisted. My nature is social, and sitting in front of a computer and writing is contra to my nature, so it's not my favorite thing to do. I certainly know how to do it. I can do it, but it's not where my comfort zone is. So I always resisted. And then I had a conversation with a young person I was mentoring. They were probably, in their late 20s, early 30s at that time. A friend, it was actually a friend's kid that I had known since he was growing up, had gone to college, had gone into business, and landed a new job in a customer-facing role, and reached out to me and said, I don't know anything about what I have to do here. Nothing I learned in college prepared me for this job. I need your help. And so that was one moment of truth. And I mentored him and I coached him and I got him through his getting on board with that job. He became very successful in it, which makes me happy. And during the same time frame, I shared that story with a colleague mentor that I met with regularly for coffee. And she said to me, over the years we've been meeting, I have heard you say more times than one, you've had to go through this same education of people. And the things that you teach them is always the same. So you should really, really seriously consider putting this into a book because you have wisdom in this area. And I'm going to encourage you to do that. So that planted the seed. I kind of did not want to, but I was in between. When you work in early stage companies and startups, you have a lot of in between time.
Yeah.
So I was in between and I decided, okay, when I was in between, I would always do my own research and look into things. I'm a naturally curious person. So I said, I'm going to look into what it would actually take to write a book. And I found myself talking to colleagues and friends of colleagues who had written business books, asked them what their journeys are, similar to what you ask here, found many different paths. I attended a few author conferences to learn about publishing and the different models of publishing and how that worked. And then I decided, okay, I think I can do this. So that was the inspiration. I formed my own author board of directors who have been with me, thankfully, through this whole journey. It's a series of authors and professional colleagues that I go to with questions when I run into a stumbling block or I'm not sure how to approach or what to do about things. It was through that group that I actually got my publishing deal because they introduced me to my publisher along the way.
Right.
And that was it. My purpose was really to not have to repeat this constant training that I was doing of people to understand the very basics of customer centricity, how it impacts businesses both in their results and in how you structure yourself, how you operate, how you go to market, and especially how you communicate and interact with customers.
Right. So this is a very interesting thing about you creating a board of advisors. Was this something that came to you when you attended these conferences that I should have a board and I have these colleagues and I know some people? How did that happen?
Well, I'm a naturally collaborative person and with many phases in my career. And in one of my career phases, I was a facilitator. And I did a lot of facilitation consulting work on strategy and design with companies. And I was in a small startup. There were 7 of us in this company. We were building software, which would roughly equate to platforms like Riverside or Teams or different kinds of platforms that integrated information together. And we were doing the consulting to draw the information out of the humans who were involved in the process of strategy or decision making or, board formation or whatever it was. And I mean, we worked in nonprofit and for-profit and in non-government organizations doing grassroots work. And it was during that time that I learned that I always needed a board of directors around whatever major project I was taking on. So this was not my first board of directors that I built for myself. This was my author board of directors. I had one, when I take on a board role in a nonprofit. I was involved in the arts community for many years. I'm involved in other different communities, my alumni, different ones. I always choose a few advisors to have. I advise and mentor and coach people, but I find that, we don't live on an island, and it's always really wonderful to have sounding boards, to have people who will challenge you. I'm not looking for people who will actually, tell me I'm doing everything right. I'm looking for people who will point me in the right direction. I think Abraham Lincoln did this. I learned later that Abraham Lincoln, as I studied history, that Abraham Lincoln had his kind of board of people, his congressional people, of people who agreed with him, disagreed with him, and so forth. So I've always done that, and I chose to do it again for this book.
How interesting, and how nice to know that. So you formed this board, and this was how long back?
This was over 10 years ago that the genesis of the book started. I was in between jobs. It was way before I was retired. I was still actively doing startups and advising, and also, taking roles in executive management in companies at the time. But I was in between. And as a board, this group never met. They were my board that I would reach out to. I would reach out sometimes to 2 or 3 at a time and get multiple responses. And sometimes I would choose an advisor for a one-on-one on a particular topic. Right. And they were always checking in with me because that's what I asked them to do, to hold me accountable, and asking along the way many times telling me how slow I was going. I needed to get back on this and things like that to keep me motivated. Right.
And this included both authors and your colleagues in the discipline.
That's right. It was several authors who had written business books, one publisher, one person who had worked a lot with publishing, and then a number of people who were in my field that were trusted advisors already in other areas that I knew I needed subject matter direction as well.
Right. So how was your process? I mean, was this something you were doing while you were consulting, and you said, okay, this is one point that I'm actually communicating every time, so this needs to be a part of my book. So how was the process of actually deciding what the 15 chapters are going to be? I know they're not chapters yet, but
that's
the ideas that you thought should be in the book.
It was a couple different processes at different stages, is what I would say. So in the beginning, while I was in between, I was exploring this, and I made the decision, and I'm a person who finishes what I start. So I knew when I made that decision, whether it was going to take me 6 months or 25 years, I was going to finish this book. And I knew I had the knowledge. So I started with a mind map. I don't know how familiar you are with mind mapping. It's it's a tool that I've used a lot when I've done facilitation and other things. Right. So I started with a mind map, and over a period of about 1 to 2 months, I just had it up on the wall in my office. I use Post-its when I do mind mapping so I can move things around, and I when I'd have a thought, or I would write it down, I would color code it to a theme. I had several themes that I was working with. And I built this mind map, which generated about 9 of the chapters that ended up in the book. And I started writing with that. Once I kind of felt like the mind map was settled and it was constructed and there was content there and it had a good flow to it, I started to write a couple of chapters, and then I got a job. So it all went on hold because I was sitting as a chief customer officer in a early stage startup, and I was working long hours and focusing on that. But when I would have a learning or a case study, something that happened that was like, this is very illustrative of this particular point that was already there on the mind map, I would jot it down on a Post-it and stick it on the mind map. So I was collecting content the whole time. And then when I ended that job and I had time again, I got back to the book. And that cycled through a number of different roles and time periods where I would concentratedly write on the book, and other times when I was putting it on the shelf and not working on it much. So, it came together over a period of time. During that time, I was also doing a fair amount of speaking and blogging, and I had formed separately from the book. I had gotten involved with a group of customer success leaders. The field of customer success was just emerging. I came to it through professional services, but people were coming from marketing, from sales, from all different customer-facing fields into this emerging field of customer success. Yeah. And I was involved in that, so that also helped gel some of the content.
Right. And while you were doing the speaking, you were looking at questions that your audience was asking you. Was that giving you also inputs as to, okay, so if this is the question, this is the kind of stuff that needs to go into that chapter?
Yeah, a lot of what I was learning as I did that was confirming that I had the right content already, because I wasn't really hearing many new questions. It was more about people not knowing or not understanding how things fit together. There are a bunch of dimensions in business, and most people are rather narrowly focused in their education and their approach to things. I studied economics, and there's macroeconomics and there's microeconomics. And in business, people are very micro. They're short-term focused. They're focused on their role, on their job, on their company. And they don't step back and look at how the big picture fits together. And unfortunately for us as customers are usually in the external part of those narrow focuses. Yeah. And that theme became more and more common. And I also, through the process, I had several versions of the manuscript. I got one done completely with the original 9 chapters. And I was working with my board to try to figure out, was I going to pitch this? Was I going to get an agent? Was I going to self-publish? Was I going to hybrid publish? And I decided, at that point, I actually decided I was going to hybrid publish. And so I went off and hired myself a content editor before I went into a copy edit phase, just to make sure that everything held together, because that was advice that I got. Yeah. And all along this time, people were reading the chapters and giving me feedback and providing me input. So it wasn't all just something I was holding on to. And when I hired the content editor, which I'm very grateful for, her observation was that I had the themes, which started on the mind map, were creating repetition through the chapters. Too much repetition, because the same theme applied across multiple chapters. So we restructured the table of contents to very similar to what the book ended up being, minus 2 chapters. There were 2 more pullouts after that, but I did a major rewrite at that point in time. And with that, it was, that's when it started to come together as an academic book, more than a business book that somebody would just pick up off the shelf and read. And because we split the theory and we split the practice into two different parts. And I pulled the themes out, and that generated chapters on on communication, on technology, on organization. Those were three of the things that were related to everything about customer centricity. Right. And then of course I like the metrics part. I had to say, this is why you do it, and here is how you do it. And the same thing with building personas and customer journeys. This is the why you need to understand how you do it, and this is the how you do it. And so we split those things up, and that was a tedious and time-consuming and, for me, very torturous part of the process that I did not like, but I'm very satisfied and happy with how it turned out. And it was during that time that one of the colleagues introduced me and said, look, I have this publisher I know. I think your book is really suited for them. I'm going to connect you. And I got connected with someone at Routledge, which is a very worldwide known publisher in the academic space. They asked me to submit a proposal, so I stopped working on the book at that point. I had like 2 or 3 chapters that I was still revising, and I worked on their very structured proposal format to pull everything together, which I knew was, if they didn't accept the proposal, I knew it was work that would have to be done anyway in the hybrid publishing.
True.
It was, double checking references and cross-referencing graphics, doing graphic design, that type of thing. And then we signed a contract, and then I was on the path to just get it done and get it turned over. And that was where it came to fruition.
So the last leg, since from the point you put in your proposal or you connected with the publisher to the finished book, how long was that?
That was about 1.5 years.
Right.
Well, it was from public. I mean, I finished during that time, but from the time I signed the contract to the time I turned the manuscript in was probably about 8 months, 7 or 8 months. And then there was a post-production phase with the publisher where I was still involved with the copy editing, with the layout, with the cover design, with many other aspects that they were taking on, but I was involved in. And then there was a quiet period when everything was done, but they were working on getting their pieces together for the launch and the marketing. And that was probably another 3 months at that point. So.
Right. And would you recall any major feedback that you received while the book was under writing that changed the course of a chapter or some part of your thinking as to how it should be approached? Can you recall any incident?
There were a few. For sure. I've mentioned this content editor that I had, and that was one major rewrite that happened, for sure. Was pulling out the communication things, the organizational thing. In fact, at that point in time, we pulled out what could be an entire book, probably about 6,000-7,000 words worth of content that was related to change management and organizational friction, which is a chapter in the book. I talk about friction and I talk about organizational design. I talk about friction, but we pulled out, I had so many examples because it's so prevalent in business to create this kind of friction. And I had so many case studies and so many examples there that the big major feedback was, do you really want to, if this is going to be who speaks for the customer, you need to not have this part of it so big and all the other parts of it at this size. Right. And so we pulled that out. And then the other major piece of adjustment was in the communication, which was the last chapter that I pulled out, because it's so foundational to everything that I needed to, really focus on that and give it its own attention and focus, which I had not done. All of the lessons that are in that chapter had been spread throughout the book.
Let's sort of move on to the actual book now. And I want to start by asking you that I don't know whether you will recall, way back in 1998, Patricia Seabold and Ronnie M. Marshak wrote a book called Customers.com.
Yes, I do know that book.
And that became sort of a landmark book for that era, which was the first .com boom and bust before that.
I lived through that, so I do remember
Exactly,
that.
right? All of us. It was exciting and not so exciting both. So although that book started as if it was purely for the .com businesses, but the case studies were mainstream B2B companies, right? And your book is also focused on B2B. It's not like retail focused.
That's right. It's not consumer oriented.
It's not consumer oriented. Yes. And it's nearly 30 years. And if you remember, I asked this question, I said, we'll come back to this, is why are we not making progress with where we were? I mean, I'm sure technology, and I'm sure there is, I mean, like you said, there's a whole discipline of customer success which has come about since then and so on. But why is it that fundamentally it seems we are not making progress?
Yeah. So like I said before, I wish I knew the answer to that, because my passion is really about building a better customer world, because I am a customer. We all are customers. And I do think we've made progress, but I think we forget to step back and think about, like you said, the field of customer success that's grew up over the last 10 to 15 years now is a progress. It's a function that when it started, we weren't sure, those of us who were working in management, we were not sure that it was going to get a seat at the table, that there was going to be something called a chief customer officer, that there was going to be a budget and emphasis enough put on it. And when you think about the other functions in a business, like sales and marketing, literally those functions are thousands of years old. And customer success and this customer centricity has been building in tiny baby steps to where we are today, which is still not mature by any means. But we have made progress, just not enough and not quickly enough. And I'm actually hopeful that along, the accelerating path of technology, that we can leverage some of the newer technology tools like AI, for example, which to me is simply another new tool in the course of technology, that we can leverage that to make things more customer centric. Because I think for one tool that's coming along now, as I've lived through the technology eras, I've seen each of them impact how customers are treated, how customers are managed, how customers are measured or not measured. And as we currently still don't have metrics, this is the one factor that I think will be the turning point for when customer centricity actually becomes as natural as, sales models and go-to-market models and things like that, customer models, is when businesses actually measure based on that, when they understand the value of their business and their profit derives from the value that their customers get. And they start to measure that. And it was the very first chapter I wrote was the metrics chapter, because to me it's central. What you measure, I learned in business school and economics, what you measure is what you manage. And we still today, although we have some metrics that have crept into the mainstream that are in 10Ks and financial reporting that companies do, like net recurring revenue is one that has crept in. It is one of like 50 metrics around customer centricity, and most of them are still not there. And it's a backwards looking metric. It's not a forecasting level metric. And so we aren't forecasting. We aren't looking at measuring value, measuring consumption, or we do have more measures now, NPS and CSAT and other, customer satisfaction measures that have crept in. Those didn't exist when your customers.com book was written. They
True.
came early, but I believe, and this is probably because I studied economics and I'm an economist at heart, that it won't become mainstream until we're actually measuring it as a critical part of how we view business success.
So it has to be linked to the profit eventually.
It has to be linked to the revenue and the profitability of a business. And
Yeah.
it is linked to the profitability and the revenue. It's just that link is out there in the ether somewhere and people don't make the connections. And I think that is because it's complicated. They call the things that are necessary to build a customer-centric business soft skills.
Yeah.
And they are actually the hardest things to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's also because we don't look at customers as humans dealing with us. We look at them as numbers, like lifetime value and cost of acquisition. These are all very non-relatable, non-human kind of very, what should I say, just numbers.
Right.
We are so used to looking at customers as numbers. I think that sort of dehumanizes it, and a lot of what you're talking of now are the new metrics like NPS, for instance. They are more human because somebody is doing it, and it can make or break what you are doing.
Yeah. I also think it's about the framing of how you look at those numbers. So if you choose to look at them strictly as a number and forget, and you don't do what I call segmentation correctly. I mean, the understanding the customer's journey from the outside in, that's a theme in my book that's been there since day one. If you look at everything from your perspective, that's when they become numbers. What does this cohort of customers mean in terms of the profit that they drive, the cost that they have, all of those things? How much it costs to acquire a big customer, how much it costs to acquire a small customer? How do we manage a big customer and what's the cost of that? How do we manage a small customer and what? We need to understand those things in the framework of the value that those customers bring, and also from the customer's perspective. I mean, there are some case studies in the book where because I work with startups and I do a lot of advising, where I could go in and very clearly see that the use cases that the company defined when they built their product were not what the customer was getting value from. The customer was actually getting value in some other way that the company was completely blind to. They had no idea how it was being used. They didn't observe their customers doing the work or using the product. And it's an unfortunate thing that when we look at these metrics and things, when you look at your financials, you look at them, if you're in business, you look at them sometimes daily, definitely monthly, quarterly, annually. Most people who look at these customer metrics, they build them once and they then continue to use them. They don't integrate them into their strategy and their business planning. They don't re-look at their customer journey. They don't re-look at their product value proposition. And to me, it's counterintuitive why you would set up, it's really a hypothesis when you do it. And so you set it up as a hypothesis and then you never go back to it. You continue to operate as if it was reality until it fails. And then you might go back and look at it. But why aren't we looking at our customer journeys, the personas that we're serving and how they've evolved, the product market fit? Why aren't we looking at that monthly, quarterly, at least annually. Okay.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
this is the difference that I think we need to get to make a real difference in customer centricity across business. You would never think of not looking at your financials from what you project at the beginning of the year and at the end of the year saying, well, how did we do?
Yeah. Yeah.
But we do that with customer value and how we go to market with customers. We don't do that outside in looking to question the decisions that we make and how is this going to impact the customer? How is it going to impact these segments? How is this product change? And this is what we as customers experience. I like many people, hate every single upgrade that comes to my devices because I don't know what it's going to mess up in terms of how I use the system, which is probably not what they're intending. They're doing it for a legitimate reason, whatever that is. Some customer requested it. It's a cost saving, whatever it is, but it impacts different people different ways because we all use things. We're humans. We're all unique.
Yeah.
I find that diversity and that uniqueness to be very wonderful and special, but we don't all use things exactly the same way. And that's where I think the challenge lies.
I agree. It's time for a short break. Stay with us. After the break,
You go into a restaurant today or any place where you're a customer and somebody makes a mistake because it happens and you get an apology. And you don't get appreciation for there's a difference between saying, I'm sorry that this happened to you, and saying, I appreciate that you went through something that was not a good experience. Two very different frames on the same situation. So I learned then that good customer service shows appreciation for the customer's perspective on things.
You are listening to a Business Podcast Network original. Podcasting is the fastest growing content marketing opportunity, which is untapped. We can help you craft your audio strategy and help leverage the wide reach and easy streaming capability that the smartphone penetration provides. It is easy, it is powerful and personal. Talk to us to find out how podcasting can help you build your brand and reach out to your targets like never before. Write to us at bpn@bizcast.in. That is bpn@bizcast.in. Business Podcast Network. Podcasts end to end.
welcome back. I'm Shubhanjan Sarkar, your host for Bits About Books and founder of PitchLink, the buyer-seller engagement platform. Let's dive right back into the episode where we left it. I would like to go back to the story of your family business because I think that's also very critical in terms of connecting the human bit, the customer bit, which actually technology can solve or is solving in a very different way, but it's taking away the touch somehow. Somehow, at some point, the data aggregation overshadows the human face.
I agree. Yeah. So I grew up in a retail business. It was a very specialized business, a family business. It was orthopedic shoes and dance wear. Now, put those two things together. We had the old people with their orthopedic shoes and we had the little kids getting ballet slippers and leotards and tights, all in the same store. And what was the common thread was fit. Because they both required understanding how the foot works and which shoe to make fit for both of those two different use cases. Okay. They were in fact two very unique and different use cases. But what we did was and this was back in the 70s and the 80s. I mean, the business started in the 60s when I was young. But we kept records on everything. At the customer level, we kept records on who bought what, when they bought it, what color, how it was adjusted, how they were planning to use it, who their doctor was, if it was on the orthopedic side, who their dance teacher was, if it was on the dance side. We had binders and index cards, and we had a CRM on paper that contained all of this information. And we also had some rules, which I just knew as family rules when we were doing them. A customer had to be greeted within 5 seconds of walking through the front door. That meant that the front of the store was never left unattended, which was an important thing for shoplifting, also an important thing for hospitality. I mean, we had coffee and cookies in the front of the store because people had to wait, and customers were served one at a time, and they had to be queued up. And there was a big sign across the back of the counter that said, "Thank you for your patience. You too will receive the same dedicated service when it's your turn." Yeah. And I learned then, you go into a restaurant today or any place where you're a customer and somebody makes a mistake, because it happens, and you get an apology. And you don't get appreciation for there's a difference between saying, "I'm sorry that this happened to you," and saying, "I appreciate that you went through something that was not a good experience." Yeah. Two very different frames on the same situation. So I learned then that good customer service shows appreciation for the customer's perspective on things. Their perspective was they had to wait. I mean, often we had cranky customers that, I just want to buy a shoelace. Why do I have to wait until you're done fitting this person's complicated brace on their shoe or whatever it was? But everybody received the same service no matter what. And so I learned those lessons. I never understood them as lessons until hindsight in business came to me many, many years later. But I do know that all of those basics, the foundational things, they have not changed over, 50, 60 years of time in terms of what makes businesses successful. And you see today cycles. I've seen cycles of, growth in small businesses, that then some of which grow up into bigger businesses and some of which just stay as small businesses. I think a lot of it has to do with it's much easier to manage the human side of the customers in a small business. You have fewer, as you scale up a business, the scale of that requires you to go to the systems that dehumanize everything into numbers. Yeah. And you lose that human touch. But the human side of things is something that's resurfacing with AI, because we recognize with this particular tool how much it dehumanizes everything very quickly. It's robotic, it's technology and it's robotic. So I'm hearing more chatter at the low level about, how do we get the human side of things back in? How do we humanize things? I wouldn't be surprised if there's a role sometime in the future of a humanizing role in business, right? That somebody has that job to try to figure out what to do with it. Because that's what happens as technology comes along. Everything evolves and changes. But, it's different when you're managing large sets of data versus small sets. So it's easier to do on a small scale. And if you do what I talked about earlier, if you actually revisit your customer journey as you scale, as you go, then you have the potential to continue to maintain that human element that you need to have, the customer-centered, outside-in thinking element. How does this impact the customer? At companies that I've sat on the executive team, I am always the person who has to say about major business decisions, like we're going to launch this product, or we're going to change this functionality, or we're going to pivot our go-to-market strategy in this direction or in that direction. I'm the one who always has to say, how does that impact our customers? And we have to pause and look at that and see, where does that impact the revenue? Where does that impact the customer management? Where does that impact the selling go-to-market? Where does that impact the market? You really have to look at it from the outside in. And most companies are creative humans in the company that are just thinking about what they want to do and being very creative and taking it off in a direction that belongs to them. They may not even be the audience of the customer that they're serving. And this is where, one of the things in the book that I look at is the generational differences because I have experienced so much of different generations selling to different generations, right? So millennials selling to baby boomers, or baby boomers selling to traditionalists, or Zoomers who are selling to Gen Xers, because as new people come in, they're interacting with, and they have different communication styles, they have different approaches to work, they have different value systems.
Yeah.
Because they grew up in a completely different era. And those things all affect the human experience. And they're not hard to solve because they can be solved with communication, with understand these soft skills, empathy, listening, all of these things. But you have to be conscious of them before you try to solve them.
Yeah. Yeah. And we are also sort of building a society which is dealing with humans less and less, right? So, I mean, the whole idea of scrolling, I mean, you must have seen in a restaurant, there are 5 people in the family, everybody's on the phone.
Yes,
nobody's
exactly.
talking to each other. And we're sort of legitimizing it, right? I mean, we're saying this is okay.
Well, I think that that's a generational thing too, though, because, the digital natives were never trained. I mean, I still am in touch with many people that I grew up with because I'm a collector of relationships and people because I'm social, like I said.
Yeah.
But we talk about what our growing up experience was versus the kids' growing up experiences. So the kids of my generation, the progeny of my generation, are largely millennials. Okay, I'm a baby boomer. And then the millennials are starting to now have the alphas, the late Zoomers and the alphas. And each of these generations has had a different relationship with technology because of where technology was in their formative years.
Right.
And there you do find people who insisted that their kids not have screen time and go out in nature and, play with other kids. But we never had play dates. This was something, we just went out and played, with the kids on the block. And when the street lights came on, we went home, It was a whole different society, a whole different rule. So I do think technology has had some very negative impacts in how we've communicated. And unfortunately, the generations that have grown up formed by that have that as their basic bias. That's why you see people sitting and scrolling, people at the same table texting each other instead of talking to each other because they're uncomfortable with that level of human interaction and communication. All of that is where we are. We have nothing we can do to change where we are. But you do start to see the Zoomer generation and probably the alphas are resisting that more. Okay, they want more human interaction. They're demanding more of that. And I do think it's cycles, right? And so we go through these phases and cycles. And the more we can bring it to people's consciousness, that chapter on the generational stuff, which was sort of an aside that I did as a presentation for a conference, that asked me to do something on generations, became one of the most popular things as I was putting the book out to readers and getting feedback because people had not thought about it in that frame.
Right. So this is a good time to touch upon the communication piece, which is so critical for customer success and and registering the customer's voice, right? Mm-hmm. So would you like to talk a bit about what you have in that chapter?
Sure. So communication and learning to be a great communicator is hard work. And it's something that most of us do on an unconscious level. We don't make it a conscious effort. And there are some very basic things. This comes from my background as doing some work in the facilitation space, because that was all about training people to be active listeners, to paraphrase back, to question for understanding, to make sure we're understanding each other, especially because we do have a lot of diversity in business and in the world today. And we frame everything from our own lived experiences. And I was fortunate enough to have very diverse lived experiences, lived abroad, traveled a lot, lived in many places. Most people don't have that.
True.
They grow up in a bubble that they've lived in their entire lives. And so it's essential. And so many business problems trace back to poor communication.
Yes.
One of the big lessons there is about expectation setting. And we're not very conscious about intention and expectation. These are areas of communication. What am I trying? We just talk. We don't say, what am I trying to say? What is the message that I'm trying to communicate? And most importantly, how is that message going to be received by the person on the other side? Because if I'm a business and I have these segments of customers with different use cases and different approaches to how they're using my product, whatever it is, be it software or something else, if I don't think through how I put out one communication and it's received very differently by different groups, that's going to create natural friction. There's a ton of natural friction that happens with communication. And then once there's friction, then you've added a layer of complexity that you don't need to have. So just being more intentional, more conscious of how you're communicating and listening, bringing the customer voice into things at the early stages of setting strategy, of designing product, of building go-to-market plans. The more you can bring that in and think through the different audiences that you have and how they are going to receive the communication, the more you realize you need to customize or personalize it. Actually, the consumer world gets this, but they have a customer of one. When you're in a business, you have a customer of many. And if you really want to be successful, you want to grow that many to many more and many more and many more, which requires the scale. And if you don't put the processes in place to understand the different dimensions of these customers, their financial dimension. I mean, many companies overarch on the big customer, and they do what the big customer wants, ignoring that they might be messing up for many people the exact reason why they bought the product. And all of a sudden, they lose hundreds of customers across a certain use case because they were solving for one. Yeah. And you have to find that balance in there and figure out what it is. And it's really hard work. And the communication part is really designed to help take away the friction layer. That you can control. You can actually control that by listening, active listening with your customers, by getting out and talking to your customers. I mean, I work with startups all the time, and even when they're small and early stage, they forget, they get excited, and they go talk to a customer, and then they go build what that customer said. And I said, well, have you talked to other customers? When was the last time you went out and talked to a customer? I'm always asking executives that, and way too often, it's way too long since they've talked to a customer.
Yeah, I mean, that reminds me of Steve Blank's book, and I don't know why people don't read it. Right?
There's another great book called Chief Customer Officer, which Jenny Bliss wrote it a long time ago. She's had several editions of it that talks about bringing the customer's voice in and how to do that. And there's many now that customer success, I mean, we have many books in this field now. During the time that I was writing this book, at least 15 other books came out on the customer space. And that's great. And none of them were my book, and most of them are not academic. They take one topic and go deep in it. But I do think we have made progress. And I think it's just that we aren't looking at that. We've made a little bit of progress. We're still a kid in terms of customer centricity. We haven't grown up yet. We're not even a teenager where we're stumbling across our problems and things, if you look at the cycle of things. But we have made progress because we do have customer-centered people, and we have a function now that is called customer success that actually seems to be staying. And I feel like the cohort of us executives that were in this stage early, we kept that in mind. I mean, we constantly were talking about how do we get the seat at the table? How do we maintain the seat at the table? Because if we don't do that, then we'll never be successful in the long run.
True. Again, I'm sort of linking back, because end of the day, the motivation of the C-suite is, does this contribute towards revenue growth? Does this contribute towards profit growth? Right? And one of the things that you mentioned earlier, and also you have a chapter in your book, is really about retention.
Yes.
That we are over focused on acquisition, but not retention.
That's right. That's right.
And this is not a new problem. So even pre-customer success days, when we are talking of pure sales, this was a known problem.
Yeah, there was a big sales team and a small account management team, right?
Right. and it's strange, right? I mean, everybody knew the math that it's like several X more to acquire a customer than to retain one.
Yeah.
Yet we are not focused on that at all. We are not focused on whether the promises made by the sales team are delivered, whether it led
to none of that. We still have those problems. And I think it comes from a myopic view of not looking from the outside in. And I think it comes from and not checking back in with your customer journey, your customer, once you have the model, a customer model and a structure around customers, we do it once and we leave it there. And we don't continuously evolve it. Like we continuously evolve our financials through, revenue recognition, different things. Financials have evolved over time, but we have not evolved this customer side of things.
You touched upon some of the data points that you need to capture. What are the key KPIs that you think companies should definitely look at on a regular basis? And where is that data actually hiding today?
Yeah, well, the data today, this is where AI can help because the data today is extremely distributed. It's, you have some of it in your financial systems because you have your revenue and things like that. So if you think about what are the layers of dimension of measuring a customer against a business result, okay? So you have the revenue, obviously, that's one thing, which we do measure and we have that, but we neglect to tie it to the other dimensions like product usage. So which revenue is tied to which use case in the product? How they're using the product, so just segmenting that out, segmenting out the industry or the business type that is buying from you. Who's buying this? Who are the customers? Who are they? And what are their needs? And then the next dimension is kind of what value are they getting at it? What is it that's driving their purchase? We think about what drives the original purchase, but we don't think about what drives the ongoing usage and management of the product once it's installed. Usually the buyer originally is not the end user. So there's those dimensions, right? You have the person who's making the purchase and you have the person who's using the product, and you have to meet both needs. And then you have as their business evolves, so there's all these cycling evolutions. It's actually quite complex. You got your customers' evolution as they're growing and scaling their businesses, and their need for your product might fit at a certain phase of their business, or not. And then there's your cycles and phases as you're growing your business, because they may be in a cohort that becomes less important to you from a revenue standpoint. And there's also the cost side of it, of what does it cost to manage this? What does it cost to maintain the product for this use case? As we evolve it for other use cases, sometimes you get triple-headed monsters where you've got 3 series of maintenances that you have to be doing for different cohorts of customers. And eventually one of them is going to drop off and become the smaller one. And then what do you do with those customers? How do you continue to serve them? Maybe you can't. Maybe you have to make the hard decision to get rid of those customers, but then they're attached to that revenue. And we are so in love with our revenue that drives our profits, right? So those are all of those are the KPIs. And then you have to think about I think you also have to measure your human side, right? So how are you engaging with your customers? What is their experience in terms of not just using the product, but just interacting with your company?
Right.
There are so many times that mixed messages get sent to customers because the accounts receivable department doesn't know that there's a critical escalation happening over here, and that's why the bill isn't being paid, and they send somebody off to collections. That's a case study that I have in my book. And then all of a sudden, here's a customer who's having daily conversations with senior management in your company who have promised them something. We're not going to charge you until we get this fixed. And then they get turned over to collections. How does that feel as a customer? Not very good, Now, AI can actually help us with this because the information is very dispersed. And that's what AI does really well, is take broad data sets and bring insights together from them. But it still takes the human to know what to look for, to know what the framework is, the structure, how do we need to look at this, and to notice what is happening from the outside in versus the inside out. So, I have a list of probably 50 metrics in my book, and there is not one single set that works for every single company. You have to do it based on your business strategy and your phase of business. If you're in your early stage and you have a small cohort of customers, you pay attention to different things than if you're in a later stage. But you have to have the human side of it, the people side of it. You have to have the communication side of it. You have to have many different dimensions. It's a very multi-layered kind of a thing.
And that also sort of connects to your chapter on friction, right? So would you like to talk a bit about that? Because you did mention a few, but would you like to talk about that a bit more, that what kind of friction is actually impacting customers and what one can do?
Right. Well, there's all kinds of friction in the world. We all experience it. But I focus on three main areas of friction. The intergenerational one I've already mentioned, the difference between the generations and how they work. Your own organizational structure can create friction. And one thing that we forget is that when we're experiencing friction, we've all had jobs in companies where you say, it sucks to work here, I don't like my boss, or our strategy is off because I'm seeing one thing with the customer, especially if you're in a customer facing role. And over there in headquarters, they're not seeing this and they're just going off in the wrong direction because they're not listening internally to, that full connection back to what the customer is needing or saying, isn't getting into the product design, isn't getting into the go-to-market strategy and so forth. So how you structure your organization can either improve that or it can make it worse. And then as you have different sizes of companies, as you go through your own growth phases, and as your customers go through their own growth phases, you have different needs for that. So it's really important to revisit it and come back to it and reset when you need to, or pivot when you need to. And then there's the whole ecosystem of the business world that we live in, which is such a global, complicated business world now, that the cultural differences come into play, especially if you have a global company. And, I lived abroad, I worked abroad, and I've managed from the United States, the North American business. I've managed teams all over the world, teams in Asia, teams in Eastern Europe, in the Nordic countries, in Europe, in South America, Mexico. I've just had teams that have been all over the place. And I had to learn very quickly the cultural differences to make my team be successful, to work together as a team and collaborate. We had to overcome a lot of communication issues and a lot of cultural differences. Right. And, when we're looking inside out, when we're looking at what we do, we see things from our own lived experience and our own frame, and we don't understand. The basic difference between football and football, okay? Here we are headed to the World Cup pretty soon. And there's a big difference there. And what's important in different places is important. That seems like a silly thing, but it's actually not a silly thing when you're on the receiving end of not understanding the person that you're selling to or buying from.
Yeah. Cultural nuances are a big part of how people respond. And if you have no clue, then you're possibly not getting the response that you're looking for.
Right.
where do you see this going from where it is today? I know AI has some role which you mentioned in terms of uh, analyzing data, but mostly what you see is people putting up a AI driven chatbot to reduce human engagement.
I can say that there's a new role now that's growing very quickly. It's called forward development engineer, forward design engineer. They have a couple different names, but there's a new role in the customer facing world that has just come up in the last 2 years. Forward deployed engineer is the most common term for it. And this is a subject matter expert who has AI technical expertise to be able to use AI to generate customizations and code to customize products. So it's a blend of what would have been integration and professional services with subject matter expertise. So they were an attorney if it's in the legal space. They were a cook if it's in the food space. They have some deep knowledge, deep technical or subject matter knowledge. They have the ability to leverage the AI tools and understand the data sets, and they have customer facing skills. They know how to listen actively, set expectations correctly, communicate properly. And those three things have come together as glue. I think this is the kind of role, many roles over time have come and gone that have been the glue of these transitional periods. This is one of those. And these forward deployed engineers, 6 months ago, there were very few of them. Now, if you go do a job search on LinkedIn, there's like 10,000 jobs for forward deployed engineers. Right. It's one of those things that has come out of it. So I think that AI is one tool, and I think that there are some human side tools that have to be there to make it work and to actually make us get there. And I don't know, and I'm very curious, where is it going to go? And what's going to come next in this? Because I do think that we have made some big major steps in terms of the customer centricity. And I mean, there are now customer experience that those are concentrations in business school now, in some schools, not very many.
Yeah.
That's why I wrote the book, so we could get more customer centered training into the young people coming out, because they don't know what they don't know until they get there.
True.
And I do think that there's going to be some things that are going to happen, and I'm going to watch it with curiosity and see what comes up. I can't predict.
Bits About Books is brought to you by PitchLink, the buyer-seller engagement platform. PitchLink makes buying easy by enabling high-quality engagement between buyers and sellers through its presentation and discussion modules. Sellers create customized sales narratives using sales collaterals and personal videos, and reach out to prospects through a non-intrusive, buyer-qualified engagement. PitchLink requires no installation or download and holds the entire repository of sales collaterals and buyer-seller conversations. Talk to us to know more about how you can engage with customers without intrusion. Call us on 99021 631 32.
Irene, this was a fantastic conversation. I think we touched upon a lot of how the space has evolved. I mean, it appears that it has been slow, but if you look at the entire scheme of things, maybe it's not so slow. Maybe it is going to pick up pace now. As you rightly said, it's not our place to try and predict, but this is a fascinating chat, and I really thankful that you made time.
Well, thank you, Shapajan. I'm just so excited. I love to geek out over customers. It's my favorite topic. So I appreciate greatly the opportunity to talk with you about it. And I just think that, there's so much to do that's hard work, these soft skills that are really very hard to do, that I hope more of us will learn, because I think the world will just be a better place if we are better communicators, more active listeners, have more empathy towards our differences, understand that our perspective comes from our lived experience, and others have a different experience, and let's build a shared experience.
Yeah.
And, and I think that affects not just humans, but business and culture and the world. And I think it's exciting times.
Absolutely. Very, very. Irene, thank you.
My pleasure.
We have a fantastic lineup over the next couple of episodes with great conversations on breakthrough books. Subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you do not miss a single episode. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for being with us today on Bits About Books, where we talk to authors about breakthrough books on sales, marketing, and business. We hope this conversation helped inform and motivate as we all navigate a rapidly changing business environment. For us, these are enlightening conversations enriched with knowledge and expertise. We encourage you to go out and buy the book to learn firsthand and implement some of the great ideas we discussed today. We hope to have you with us again in the next exciting episode of Bits About Books. If you liked what you heard, subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast platforms like iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcast from, and give us a rating while you are at it.
This Bizcast original podcast is produced for PitchLink, the next generation buyer-seller engagement platform, where the mission is to make buying easy. Hosted by Subhanjan Sarkar and produced by Rajiv Aditya. See you next time and have a wonderful day.